Welcome to the Clause YouTube channel.
Together, we strive for a safer, secure, and more stable world.
So, welcome to the third junior podcast league, the Junior League of Clause, which is now a new thing which we've started, which is for once to hear the young mind speak. Not just we've all heard the older people speaking all the time on TV or podcasts or whatever, but I think it's time we got some fresh thinking into this. So, the whole idea for our audience is that you get to hear young scholars their views, and we would really invite anyone in the audience to sort of join us at any time. Send us a mail if you'd like to join in the Clause Junior League podcast series. So, with that, let's start off straight away. We're going to be discussing an extremely, what shall I say, very, very live issue. This issue, since the tariffs have just started. So, the whole question of the Russian Ukraine war, how did we get here from where we were? Where do we go from here? In the sense of, I never kind of thought that we were so important in stopping the Russia Ukraine war, because that's what the 25% is about, right? 25% is just tariffs, 25% plus is to stop the Russian war, a war which Europe started, and we are expected to stop it. I mean, it defies the imagination, but nonetheless, they seem to think we have that kind of clout. If we do, well, terrific. But we'll start off with sort of an update on what's happening in. I would like to, however, sorry, I need to introduce. We've got our young scholars, Ashu's here, who is a scholar on China basically, but he's standing in, also looks at the US. We've got Anusuya, who looks at Russia mainly, Nomita, who looks at Europe, and our guest, Siddharth Jayaprakash, who is with us, and he's a research assistant with the ORL Strategic Studies program, focusing on Russia's domestic politics and economy, Russia's grand strategy and India-Russia relations. He's a doctoral candidate, so he's just the right person for the show, and we're so glad to have you with us. So let's kick this off, Anusuya. Maybe you'd like to start with a quickly update us on short. We'll look for a very short update on what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. So with the Alaska summit happening on 15th, it was kind of an indication as to Russia breaking out of its isolation, trying to rebuild diplomatic ties with US. However, we did not see anything substantial come out of it. Apart from the fact that Putin is very much keen on ending the war and is ready to discuss the terms of settlement that he has very much been wanting to be talking about since the very beginning of the war. So now, following which we saw the whole coalition of the willing, European leaders going to White House, meeting with Trump and Zelensky and having the whole discussion as to why European security is now really important and needs to be discussed because they need saving. Europe really needs to kind of now figure out for themselves, I think, where it really stands and how it wants the war to end, because a ceasefire is now out of the question. And is it ready to come down to a memorandum of settlement and discuss things directly between Zelensky and Putin should be now the next thing?
Yeah, I will kind of jump in here if that's okay with you all, and go to I'll ask Siddharth. You really think Putin wants to end this war? It doesn't seem like it, because the latest news shows they're going at it hammer and tongs, and they've seized new territory. They've got, I think, one of the largest strikes has taken place yesterday. I don't see any indication of Putin wanting to end this war at all. What do you think?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for having me, first of all. I have a feeling that I think all parties do want to bring an end to the war, and even Russia has reiterated at multiple points that they do want to bring an end to the war, but they would bring the war to an end only if the conditions are met, if Russia's security interests are met, basically, which in other words means that Europe stops supporting Ukraine and Russia's conditions are met, as in Zelensky leaves the Donbass for Russia. So I think there are some preconditions that Russia wants, and if these preconditions are accepted, and then we will see a resolution to the conflict. Is what the Russian stance at present looks like.
Yes, but he is going in with territory, isn't he? He is
Ma'am,
grabbing territory. Can you hear me?
yes, ma'am, I can, I can.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the war was never about territory to begin with, because this 20% territory in Ukraine, it is not even a percentage of the whole Russian Federation as a whole. I think the war has always been about respecting. I mean, the West respecting Russia's sovereignty, so to speak, and the fear always persisted that if Ukraine would eventually join NATO or have security guarantees from the West, that would be a major challenge for Russia. So I think the Russian forces going at full steam is only because of the simple fact that if Russian forces stall their advance or if there's a ceasefire reached, what happens is the Ukrainian forces will be able to mobilize and attack back towards the Russians. So I think the Russian forces are going at an all-out to, and meanwhile, as negotiations go on, to reach a midpoint of understanding. So I think that is what the calculus here really is, because a ceasefire would mean that Ukraine would get time to reorganize, and that's something Russian forces don't want at all.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the fact that you're saying that is not even 1% of total Russian territory, I think that's a good point. But there is also the question of trading land for peace, no? I mean, you grab as much as you can. And when a peace comes, you then see what you want to keep and what you want to give back. Plus, there's also the question of the US wanting, I mean, I'm bringing in the US here, the US wanting the strategic minerals in the Donbass. Ashu, how do you see the US positioning on this? I mean, the US has said all the time. I mean, one thing you have to hand it to Trump is that he said NATO should never have come to done this, that you caused this war, and that's why you need to end it. But how do you see? You see Trump at all getting impatient with this whole thing, which is why he's targeting us. How do you see this playing out?
Trump is trying everything he can to end the war right now. If we see the first summit with Zelensky, they were ready with the minerals deal and everything, and that they had an open scuffle in front of the press, and that went for a toss. Then these tariffs came in. I think they are saying it's about Russia, but India support to Russia. But I don't think we have so much stakes in Russia, or that Russia. If we are, U.S. backs us into a corner and put on more tariffs, then Russia would be compelled to end the war. But I certainly think he wants to end the war. Even today during the cabinet meeting, he was saying that I have been trying both Zelensky and Putin to come on a call at one time, but sometimes Zelensky is not there, sometimes Putin's not there, so it's very difficult to get them together. So he certainly wants to end, but I don't see how tariffs on India would lead to the end on.
Yeah, I think in that same conversation he talked again about India, Pakistan, and how this
Yeah,
seven aircraft shot down and all the rest of it in that very same conversation.
yeah, but
So it
like, if I may, we have to digress a bit on that. But see, it was a 4 minutes video, and a lot of people are saying that Trump again was doing bro beating, that he talked to the Indian PM, and that led to the end of war. But what he said, if we listen carefully, he said that he talked to Modi, but then he went there and said that I talked to the Pakistanis, and I threatened them with trade, and we want to trade with you if you we are looking at nuclear war and everything, and that led to the end of the war. So we have to look at that context. A lot of people are only seeing the starting of the video, and that's being circulated. But if we see at the complete video, is talking about more about threatening Pakistan than India.
Oh, is it? Okay, that's some good news at least, even as we face a larger tariff. Namita, how do you see what is the European stance on this? I mean, how are they at all persuading President Zelensky to come to the table? Is there anything they're offering? Right now, I think what the US is saying is basically Europe is going to pay for everything and for the weapons that Ukraine is going to have, for the reconstruction and all that. So, how do you see this playing out?
Thank you, ma'am, for having me in this podcast once again for such an important geopolitical scenario. So, Europe is important because it is still one of the main supporters of Ukraine with military aid, financial assistance, and sanctions on Russia. I would like to bring in notice the latest 18th sanction package on Russia by Europe, which includes oil price capping, permanent ban on the Nord Stream pipelines, restriction on the refined petroleum which is processed in third countries, banning of Russian banks, and uh, also sanctions on the vessels of Russia's shadow fleet. So, with the latest Alaska meet, there is something called security guarantees, which is going on between EU and United States. It is still in discussion. It's not on paper yet, but some points have been put out there, like the NATO membership of Ukraine has been ruled out in that security guarantees, and they are planning to form an Article 5 like framework through coalition of willing. Article 5 is attack on one is attack on all. So now I would like to talk about coalition of willing. So coalition of willing, just to give a background, it was formed in 2022 when the war was started, and it has some 33 plus delegations. And its main task is to strengthen Ukrainian armed forces with equipment and training, and support Ukraine's defense industry, and potentially deploy limited force on the Western Ukraine. Now, coalition of willing is interesting because it exposes some of the economic and political vulnerabilities of Europe. Now, France and United Kingdoms are the ones who initiated this coalition. But on the other hand, if we see Germany is a little reluctant because of the all parliamentary approvals they have to go through and the limited troop size they have. Similarly, Poland ruled out from the fact that they want to deploy troops. Rather, they want logistical support to be provided to Ukraine. Similarly, Italy prefers to offer Ukraine a defense pact rather than deploying soldiers. So we can see that there are political disagreements which can complicate this involvement. Now, there are in European news, there have been a lot of news going on around boosting defense capabilities, uh, and production in Europe, but there are still some gaps. So, for example, we can see Poland and Baltic states, they are leading the way in scaling up their production and defense spending. However, Germany, Italy, Spain are slower in this scaling up. This is majorly because of the slow process and the fragmented production they have across nations. So we can't ignore the fact that there is critical reliance on US where Europe lacks, which is in regards to intelligence, surveillance, satellite coverage, logistics, and long range strike weapons. That's all, ma'am.
No, that's extremely well put, Namita. I think that's a very good wrap up. But I think it's I mean, I can see a question also in the chat box, which we'll take later. That basically the Europe, the US is saying you buy weapons from us and you give it to Ukraine, which is, that is how Trump is. So in some ways, I would like to come back to Siddharth here. How, you know, in some Putin may say that I want to end this war. I mean, is he at a critical point in terms of his internal support, etc., as that he will look to end the war, or does he have greater advantage in continuing? Because keeping in mind, this is not specifically to Russia, that a wartime president rarely outlasts the peace. That is more true of Zelensky, actually. But your comments.
Ma'am, I think Putin's at the highest. His approval ratings are quite high, and I think
Mm.
internally speaking in Russia, there is a statistical anomaly that has taken place. So normally, what happens during a war is that the macroeconomic stability and salaries go down. But conversely, in 2022, after the war began, the salaries have gone up, and this was pegged with inflation. And this is even Western analysts who have come out with a statement saying that this has happened only because Russia was able to somehow reconfigure its economy to prepare for this, for the war, to speak. So I think even if you look at a hypothetical situation where last month where they were talking about imposing 500% secondary tariffs, it is likely that the Russian economy will be impacted because export revenues will be impacted. But I think that the macroeconomic stability of Russia will be okay for a year or two. They can sustain this for time to come. The salaries will remain. They have survived 20%, 21% interest rates, which means that people cannot borrow loan. You cannot take loans to buy homes, or marry or things like that. So even despite these things, the macroeconomic stability of Russia has been very strong because their central bank and their institutions are very strong in these things. Because the problem is when in the past when people made analysis during the Soviet times, the efficiency was not there. But in this case, the efficiency is really high. Like if you look at every ministry of the Russian Federation, the people in power are more like managers rather than politicians. So by that way, I see that uh, the war fighting, whether it stops today or it stops 2 years from now, I don't think that the domestic issues will ever promulgate Putin to make a decision. I do think that the 500% tariffs would have some kind of leeway in this equation, but I do not think that these will have an impact, so to speak.
It's also extremely well put, Siddharth. I was just wondering, I mean, this, like I said, I don't know anything about this. So I'm assuming that much of Russia's trade is with China. So whatever sanctions they face elsewhere, the Chinese trade remains unaffected. What do you think, Ashu?
Yes, Russia's largest trade is with China, and due to oil being cheaper, it has increased with us also a lot. Since 2022, since the war started, we have imported around 140 billion worth of oil from Russia, and it's increasing only. We are not dialing it down, and China is also a huge factor in that. But the current account deficit, if we see with China, is more on the Russian side. So that means Russia imports more from China than it exports to.
Oh, okay. And
Ma'am,
Anasuya, you had written, sorry, you want to say something?
Ma'am, if I may add, I apologize. I
Yeah.
also think that external shocks of the Chinese economy have its impacts on Russia as well. As you put out earlier, that the Russia's dependence on China has increased. So what, like when 235% tariffs were imposed, that would have also impacted the Russian economy because Russia sells most of its raw materials to China. So and China is an exporter economy. So a lot of the fuel, a lot of the gas and oil, the consumption would reduce significantly in China, which would in turn impact Russia's economy. So lesser tariffs on China would mean that the trade with Russia also remains high for China.
That's a very, very good point. Yeah, that's very true. And Anasuya, you had written a paper on how Russia trades with its own neighbors, with the countries in its image. So, would you like to comment on that, on whether that trade, to some extent, offsets the trade it may lose elsewhere?
Uh, the trade that Russia, if we see from 2022, even though because of the Western sanctions and for the laws, we are starting to see a little bit of an economic strain at the moment. But rightly put by Siddharth, the institutions have been they are controlling it in a way that it is well enough to sustain itself for a year or two. However, we also see that a lot of trade that is happening between Russia and its Eurasian partners, or for that matter, BRICS, they are also exploring into new trade cooperations or new areas of collaborations that they could look at. So while Russia might be losing on Western and European markets, they are very well looking to fill in the void with bring themselves up with Asian markets, BRICS markets, and the Eurasian Union markets. So we see a significant rise in the trade between all of these countries. However, Russia, according what I feel, is still remains on like the receiving end. So this may not be like a very significant trade growth from 2022 to 2025, but it is bit by bit increasing with all these respective countries. So while we look
Which are
at
the, sorry, just for the audience, just tell them which is the grouping, which are the countries involved in the
Oh, so we
Eurasian.
are looking at in the Eurasian Union, we are looking at Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and countries of that region. Uh, while recent developments with Armenia and Russia might have some changes in that dynamics of theirs politically, but they do see a rise in terms of trade that is happening between all those two countries. Also, looking at Brazil and South Africa, India and China, BRICS has also significantly improved ties within themselves and within Russia. So, I mean, Kazan was one of the biggest examples to see how I think some 32 leaders, world leaders, were there in Kazan. And while West really kind of brought out that Russia is going to be isolated, this and that, the whole rhetoric of it. 32 leaders being there and trying to have some kind of a summit really speaks a lot.
Yeah, but it is still some kind of a summit. I don't think it's got much beyond that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It may. I mean, that's what everybody's looking at, and which what Trump doesn't want is what BRICS to take off. But as of now, I don't know. Namita, what is the existing trade between Europe and Russia? There is a lot still going on, isn't it?
Uh, Ma'am, I'm not aware about the existing trade, but I would like to bring in notice about the that Europe was a lot dependent on Russia for energy trade. So Europe needs to look beyond Russia for the energy trade now with the Nord Stream pipelines, sanctions on the banning the Nord Stream pipelines. It has to look for alternatives. So as far as I know, there are a lot of options in house in Europe. Europe can look inwards, like it has Norway and Iceland are the best options. Plus, we could see. Uh, there's something called energy diplomacy going on in Europe, and there's a plan called replan re so Europe is trying to look towards Asia and Indo-Pacific for its energy alternatives. So yes, that
No,
is the
you're
main.
absolutely right. I mean, I think there's a huge rethinking in terms of energy in Europe. You're absolutely right. So there is, I think they're looking at green energy, but I think, like for example, the whole nuclear energy thrust has gone backwards. There is inflation. I mean, Germany, right? The prices of power has gone up hugely. So Europe is paying for this war. Last year, I think their growth was what? I think 1.3% or something like that. I mean, I don't know. You could correct me if I'm wrong. But as far as I know, Europe has suffered very badly with this war. Now the question is whether there is, I think, a strong segment within Europe, however, which, like you very well brought out, still wants to trade with Russia. Their business is depends on the Russian market. I don't know if Siddharth wants to come in on this. Do you want to come in on this aspect
Uh,
of Russia, Europe?
Sure, ma'am. Sure.
Yeah.
I think that with regard to some countries in Europe, like countries in the Central and Eastern Europe, are much more dependent on Russia for their energy needs. Like the whole value chain is connected, intertwined with Russia. Like for instance,
Mm.
Gazprom, which is Russia's state gas producer, has its subsidiaries all across Eastern Europe. So when the decision was made to reduce dependence on gas, countries like Slovakia were massively impacted by this. So that's not only included Slovakia, but even countries that are politically vehemently against Russia, but even in the Baltics, like for instance Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, till about 2023 had their energy chains intertwined with Russia. So uh, breaking off from Russia would be a very messy divorce for them. Like even today, the energy dependence on Russia does remain high, even though Europe says that by 2027 they want to move away from it. But at the short term, it looks quite unlikely because it's, as you said, ma'am, it's very expensive and inflation is soaring across Europe.
Okay, I think particularly I believe Germany in the previous government, they had a lot of business ties with the Russians, so that is also breaking. Ashu, in your view, the US for the US, it's long, very since decades. It's been a objective to break Europe-Russia ties. I mean, it's not something which has started today or yesterday. It's been for years. But do you think this is this is going to work? Because at some point when this war ends, I'm assuming business will go wherever it needs to go.
Yes, ma'am. Business looks like it will be back to usual, and not just with Europe. I mean, the war has not even ended yet. There was only one summit between Trump and Russia, and already on the backlines on the summit, U.S. Companies were having negotiation with Russians. Even Exxon had a meeting with the Russian about restarting their investment in the Arctic LNG pipeline. So. Yeah, if they are doing that themselves, I don't see how they can stop the Europeans from doing that. And when Europeans when the Nord Stream 2 was destroyed, European energy bills went up. Their inflation got really higher. In Germany, some industries were even shut down. So Europe depends on Russian gas first because it's very cheap to buy gas from Russia since it comes through pipelines. If they buy gas from, let's say, US, it comes through those ships, and it's very expensive to transport. So I don't think they'll be able to break away from Russia, at least in the energy sector.
Yeah, so this is going to happen. I let's switch to our presumed influence on Zelensky. There are rumors that he's coming to Delhi. He's been invited. Those are the rumors. I don't know if it's true. Uh, and also the fact that Zelensky not being the most democratic of leaders, I don't know what his popularity ratings are. Siddharth, would you like to comment on this?
Not really, ma'am. I don't follow Ukrainian politics very. I
Okay,
don't,
that's
and
fine.
I,
That's
yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. But I think he's also got a bunch of problems. As far as I know, his popularity ratings continues, but it is going down. What do you think, Ashu? Have you followed it?
And his popularity has gone down a bit, and even people are talking about the Ukrainian ambassador to UK. He was a general in the Ukrainian army, and they are seeing him as a leader now. His popularity has soared in Ukraine,
Okay.
and
Oh,
even there are rumors that after the first summit with Trump, Zelensky Trump summit in Washington, US even tried to talk to him about standing against Zelensky, but he declined for some reason.
yeah, I think there's a lot of conspiracy theories floating around. I think the Russian sources have said that someone is trying to replace Zelensky and all that stuff.
Ma'am, if I may.
He went on
Yeah.
record to say that I don't have any leadership ambitions, and I'm firmly in support of Zelensky.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just say yeah.
Ma'am, so there were, like you said, there were also reports on Zelensky. So we have seen a lot of cabinet reshuffle and a lot of generals reshuffling being done in the military itself. And a few of them who have resigned or have changed their units were also reported saying that, whatever tactics Zelensky has, or just randomly like sending people to the front lines, and the way that we are fighting is not something that the generals personally agree to. So I think two or three of them uh, earlier this year had those reports really coming in for him. So I think that Zelensky's approval ratings in general is kind of going down.
Okay. And I'm coming back to Siddharth. Siddharth, would you like to comment? And in fact, I'm going to come to all of you all. Let's switch to the India, Russia, US angle. In terms of our I don't know what can we offer Russia, the NSA dialogue, Jaishankar going there. How do you see the India-Russia, the relations separately, not just in terms of the Ukraine war? How do you see this shaping up? Because we are still waiting for some weapon systems. Their own defense industry is in trouble, but they've offered you a lot. Your views?
Ma'am, I think that the war has certainly had an influence in the way the shipments have the time duration of they taken to ship the weapon systems, etc. Um, like even though there are a lot of news, there are a lot of articles that say that our dependence on Russia has reduced over the years, but at the same time, our armed forces still has over 50% of Russian weapons, and they need consistent restocking, and we need resupply. So for that, Russia still remains an important military importer for India. So I do think that in the coming years, India will continue to buy from Russia to obviously supplement the existing stock we have. But even though we have diversified our military acquisitions from countries like France, for instance, or the United States, Russia still remains very important for India because always give you the prospects of import substitution. They always have the weapons are cheaper, and the hardware is also compatible with what the Indian Armed Forces also wants. So I think that is one area where the India-Russia defense matrix component will always be there. Like it will not go away in the near future. But naturally, the expectations of the armed forces always also increases. Um Ma'am, I think if we look at the India-Russia relations, coming to a second question, coming to the India-Russia relations, barring the Ukraine question, I think that geopolitics does influence India's foreign policy to a certain extent. India's relations with Russia is important. India believes that engagement with all great powers is part of its core foreign policy tenets. So I think that India-Russia relations has not really have been impacted. But what happens is when naturally our relations with other countries improve in the West, there is a certain segments of media that always had lash out on India for improving your relations with Russia, something like that, man.
I think, yeah, that's so. You think, okay, I'm going to push you a little bit here, just for the sake of the audience, is that with the Putin visit, where do you, sorry, where do you see us breaking ground? Do you think there will be it's one of the few, in fact, it's the only country to be involved in nuclear energy. It's the only country, I think, which is no, the second country to be involved in space. Which area do you think we would have a thrust? One which Jaishankar has said is the problem is that we don't export enough to Russia. I don't know
I
how
think
we're going to solve that. Yeah, please.
I think one of the areas where cooperation has been identified is critical minerals, because critical minerals and rare earth materials, because Russia has all the minerals in the Mendeleev's table. So I think that is one of the areas where cooperation can be strengthened. And another area which I have, although people disagree with this, but one area that I have seen bilateral relations grow is the people-to-people exchanges. Since the last few years, Indians have traveled to Russia. So I think one of the reasons why India's relations with a lot of Western countries has improved is because of the fact that the diaspora is involved strongly. I think
Hmm.
if the people-to-people relations in Russia improve, I think that would be the starting point to build better business contacts. And additionally, the language also remains a problem, and also there are a lot of business nuances, the tariffs, and these things have to be resolved. But for the main ticket items to strengthen relations with Russia, apart from defense, there naturally remains a lot of areas of cooperation. For instance, I think in automobiles, I think there can be a lot of joint ventures. For instance, I think also labor migration cooperations. I think these are some areas where India
Yeah.
can invest in. There were some talks going on in the MEA in the last decade to send Indian contract workers to Siberia in agriculture. So I mean, there are small areas and niches that two countries have to sit together and explore, and it requires a lot of commitment to come out with a conclusive mechanism to strengthen bilateral economic relations.
I think this is a visit, if it happens soon, is going to be very, very closely watched to see what the Putin visit turns out with. But in Ashur, do you want to comment on this, on how the US is likely? Okay, where are we going forward? I mean, here now the sanctions, the tariffs are in, I mean, there's a bunch of people saying, look, it's not as bad as it looks. It is firmly tied to the Russia war. And it is probably worse in other countries, which is true. Which is, I mean, I think there was a recent agreement with Japan, for instance, who offered an 800 billion investment deal, which they are now not talking about, which has been quietly set aside. So how do you see this going forward?
Ma'am, I'll address the tariff question first.
Yeah.
Initially there was supposed to be 15% tariffs on India when talks were going on. Then it went to 25, and then when India refused to budge on some key sectors, then Trump said that we are profiteering from the war, and we are letting Russia kill innocent people, and therefore we deserve 25% more. And though that 50% kicked in yesterday, but that does not apply to the whole trade. If we see figures from last year, in fiscal year 24-25, India's exports to US accounted for $91 billion, and of those $91 billion, 66% of the trade faces 50% tariffs. That includes shrimps, which was around $2.3 billion. Your diamond sector, which exports were around $10 billion. Textile was around $11 billion, and then there was handicrafts, leathers, and agricultural items. 4% of our item faces 25% tariffs, and 30% still remains duty free. And if we in and duty free are auto parts, iron and steel equipment, aluminium, copper, and electronics. So we export a lot of electronics now. And when we see the larger trade and services, India exports $100 billion worth of services to the US, which cannot be tariffed. Because that's intangible, and they pay us for providing them a service, and we provide it at 1/5 of the cost. Our software exports, our IT exports, and all those, they account for around $100 billion to US every year, apart from trade, and that cannot be tariffed by them because it's intangible assets. You cannot, they cannot tariff them. They will be tariffing their industries only. And if they even try to talk to them, we provide those services at 1/5 of the cost. So how much duties they levy on their companies, it won't. It will still be cheaper for them to get those services from India. Uh, and when we talk about their impact, our exports to US accounts for around 2.2% of our GDP, and we take out exempted sectors, it's only 0.5% base point. So it won't have that much of an impact on our GDP or our trade for now. But we certainly would need to look at other sectors, because let's say shrimps only. Shrimp industry is very large in India. Fisher and this industry is very large, and $2.4 billion, although if we see it, broader percentage point as less, but it still affects a lot of livelihood. Same with the apparel sector, and same with diamond sector is also very huge in India, and it has other factors also why it's going down. Your those factory made diamonds and all that, so it has been going down for a bit now, so that will have impact sometime in the future. But other than that, if we see, we are still talking to the Americans. So we have had cyclical relations with US, but defense relations have always been strong. Even yesterday, the two plus two intersectional dialogue happened, and that 10-year defense framework was also discussed about. But one thing that needs to be noted there is that
Please go ahead.
yeah. So one thing that needs to be noted there is it was online. Intersectional dialogues happens between. Yeah. Everyone go away.
Yeah, please go ahead, Ashu.
So intersectional dialogues happens between 2+2 ministerial meetings, which happens once in Washington, once in New Delhi, and the last intersectional dialogue was in September 24, which happened in New Delhi, and they are held physically. And this time it was online for some reason, so we may be dialing down, giving them some indications, and that might be a factor in code also, because we have to host code this time, and if that also goes online, then we might be signaling that these relations cannot be seen in different silos. We have to see the larger relationship as one thing, like we did with China after 2020.
Okay, I'm just going to go. I think it's sort of Siddharth, do you want to say anything on the future and how we see this going in
As in
terms
the
of
tariff
yeah,
episode, ma'am.
what options do we have? Yeah, in terms of this whole, threat on us, that what can India do to get
Uh,
this thing out?
as well summed up by Ashu on the impacts of the tariffs. I very much agree that it will not have big impacts on us because India is first of all a low goods to has a low goods to GDP ratio, which means that only 20% of our exports constitute part of our
Hmm.
GDP. And secondly, the telecom, cements, aviation, and services sectors are very strong in India, and that our economy is very consumption oriented. Because of these factors, the impact of these tariffs will not be very strong on India. So as for the options, some of the options we have here are that firstly, I think that the negotiations are underway as reiterated by our foreign minister a few days ago, that talks have been going on in the back channel. And secondly, this is also Trump's tactic to get a favorable deal from India. If you may remember, a few months ago, Trump had imposed 235% tariffs on China. So it's quite likely that we might also reach an agreement soon. And if you also look at the share markets, for instance, the share markets have not
Yes.
reacted very.
Hmm.
Normally when
Yes.
small shifts happen, the share markets go crazy. But this time we actually see that the share markets have completely insulated themselves from the Trump factor because they've recognized that there's going to be some kind of volatility anyway. But I think going forward, some of our options always will be to strengthen our engagements in terms of trade, to obviously reach out to the EU, to ASEAN, and improve our, like for instance, we had recent FTAs, etc. One other interesting observation is that we have more trade with countries like Indonesia in comparison to countries like the United Kingdom. So that is a way forward. Like if we improve our multilateral, if we improve our engagement with multi and plurilateral institutions, like for instance, even under the BRICS mechanism, as Anusuya had written in a paper, I think these will be very beneficial for us. Even another thing is the incidents like this also give the political impetus to conclude the free trade agreement with the EU, for instance, which had been going
Hmm.
on for a few years. I think other things would also we could do is we could genuinely look at a domestic tariff landscape,
Yes.
which
Yes.
genuinely needs a
Absolutely.
re-examination. If you remove the political pressure away, certain industries do need a re-examination. Like for instance, automobiles. We cannot have high tariffs in these sectors because the Indian consumer, the Indian middle class is growing, so the expectations is growing. So I think competition. It's a need of the hour to enhance competition. And other things is naturally that some of the industrial hubs have been impacted. For instance, if you look at Tirupur, if you look at Surat, if you look at Panipat, all these places have been severely will be impacted by these tariffs. So what the government could do here is the government could streamline some of the compliance necessities, and also introduce something like sector specific insurances to ensure that these companies or laborers don't lose their jobs. Because Tirupur, for instance, that has almost 600,000 employees, and this is in Tamil Nadu, and they almost have billions of dollars of trade exports to the United States. So we can't have a situation where the MSME sector of the country is failing. I mean, for the last 10 years, we've considerably built it up, and things like tariffs have a big impact on the MSME sector. So I think those domestic reforms are necessary. Otherwise, I think this is not going to be. These tariffs won't last long because naturally there is some kind of parity, some kind of equilibrium that has to be reached in this situation.
Okay. Okay, quick 2-minute comments from Anusuya and Nomita on any aspect of the discussion. Yeah, Nomita, please go ahead. And then we'll
Um,
get invested, sir. Huh.
just a quick interruption, and I would like to bring in Europe. I would like to talk about the India EU FTA talks. So, despite the fact that uh, during the when the war was started, India and EU had a very strained relationship, but despite that fact, the relations were not derailed. However, they were improved only. So even with the US 50% tariffs, I believe that it will push India more towards Europe as an option, because uh, for Europe invests majorly in India, and India is a major alternative market for Europe. And Europe has also started the de-risking policy with China, wherein it sees for alternative markets. So in the Indo-Pacific region, I believe India plays a very vital role for Europe. So fast tracking this EU India talks and finalizing it will be beneficial for both the continents, both EU and India. So yes, that's my point, ma'am.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Anusuya, you want to come in on this?
Uh, Ma'am, I think Ashu and Siddharth really kind of in a very brief manner put it all together. So while I think that developments with the US could kind of, so in the past 2 decades, we see that the US administration has really worked on building good relations, and now we are kind of signaling that things are slightly off. So I think that in a long run, this might just be like a minor hiccup for a few years, because I mean, US cannot lose India as a partner. So we are at a very critical point where US also needs us. Probably if we see a development on RIC, that is also going to be crucial for India, as to where our role then goes into this triangle. So I think India should really kind of work in a manner where we are concisely looking at ourselves and putting where we are going to be important in those two separate triangles altogether. So if we swing towards Russia, it kind of Russia China kind of upscales the balance. If we swing towards US, that kind of makes up for uh, our improved relations with them. And as Siddharth put it, we do see greater engagement with countries like Indonesia or ASEAN, and for that matter, also improving relations with the EU.
Okay, can we take some questions from the audience? Is Akashika, if you can just push in some of these questions, which are some of them are very good. Somebody is also complimenting the junior league, which is nice. I think someone is talking about the G engine problems. I mean, what the one G engine has already arrived, as far as I know, and I think so. That is, yeah. Ashu, you want to take that question?
Yes, ma'am. It has arrived, and we are in process of acquiring around 100 more G engines now.
So I think
F404
it's,
engine.
yeah. So that's not an issue of bilateral issue so much as the U.S. inability to produce. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am. It might be inability, or it might be that there are sometimes disruptions in supply chains, and Boeing was going through that. So sometimes these things happen, but we are buying more, and defense ties are still going on like that.
I think there is a one comment saying Trump is beating up the Americans black and blue. This is from Mr. Thadani. And I think there is a cost being paid by the Americans themselves in terms of tariffs. I don't know what this. Would anyone like to comment on that?
So,
Shu, would you like to go in on that?
I'm seeing the question, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, if we see at least the sentiment against Indian, it's very negative, at least amongst his base for now. And the these tariffs right now have not been transferred to the American consumer, but in time, if when it gets transferred in the next 2 or 3 months, we will start to see some impacts. He is already facing some friction from his base due to those Epstein files, which he refrained from
Hmm.
releasing now. and when the inflation gets a bit more higher, he might get more of friction from them. But right now, anti-Indian sentiment is bit high amongst his base, and even all top politicians, if it's Howard Lutnick or Scott Bessent, even Ron DeSantis, they are talking about H-1B visas, how they are taking away jobs from normal Americans, and that is clearly playing to his own gallery, who thinks that we are taking jobs from capable Americans, where they don't know that we get their jobs because we are much more efficient than them. So in time, I think it will happen.
It's amazing how this echo chamber operates. In the US, the moment this mindset, it's in. I wanted to ask: is there a similar, any kind of pro-India sentiment in Russia? Do you see anything of the kind from? So, yeah, please go ahead.
I think there is a pro-India sentiment in Russia. I think this war, since the war began, the Russians, I think, especially the young Russians who've never had an understanding of relations with the non-West, finally have realized that many countries in the global South and countries who they call world majority are there some of their core partners, and I think even before, even as in Russia's relations with the West. Like not the collective West, just Europe and United States declined. The soft power, the Asian soft power was very much in Russia. Like for instance, Japan and South Korea. I think now Indian soft power. I mean, with Indian tourists visiting, with Indian business setting up in Russia, there is a pro-Indian sentiment in Russia. But at the same time, there is always going to be that European Western
Yeah.
affection they have in Russia.
Yes, absolutely. I think this has overall been a very, very interesting discussion. We've, I think, gone into areas which most people haven't. For example, the Indian sentiments in Russia, for example, and what else we see. So I just want to thank all our panelists for we are in the time of flux, as one of the comments here says, things are changing almost by the hour. There are things are moving so fast, you can't afford to shut your laptop off. So we live in interesting times. So, and it's an opportunity for young researchers such as yourselves to go out there and look at things and think differently. I would once again encourage all of you all to think in terms. Critical thinking is really, really important. So feel free to go at the next iteration we have to say what you think, irrespective of what your seniors are saying, sort of thing, the seniors in age. So thank you all very much, and we'll close this discussion here. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.